Hello and welcome back to another episode of LMScast. My name is Chris Badgett, and today I am joined by Nate Wright from Theme of the Crop, and we're going to be talking about a hot topic that comes up whenever you're doing a web project, whether you're an online course creator, a teacher, or an entrepreneur. It's important to have some clear thinking around the differences between design and functionality and how to use technology to support these two different things, and some things to watch out for. But first, Nate, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So Nate does something very similar to what I do at LifterLMS, where we're predominantly, on my side, LifterLMS is a WordPress plugin that makes it easy to create, sell, and protect engaging online courses. And predominantly we make plugins, but we also have themes, and other companies have built themes that work with LifterLMS. So I'm kind of living in both worlds of plugins and themes. Nate is the creator of Theme of the Crop, which is a technology solution for restaurants looking to come online and have a website that does the things that restaurants need to do. But so tell us a little bit about Theme of the Crop, Nate. What is it, and what do you guys offer?
Yeah, so I call it a WordPress shop for themes and plugins for restaurants. So basically I sell kind of a package of plugin solutions like LifterLMS, which help you manage things like restaurants manage things like online bookings or restaurant menus, or in some cases to kind of help out with certain kinds of SEO that are particularly good for businesses, like local businesses like restaurants. And then on top of those plugins, I also sell a suite of themes, and they're basically the presentation layer. So the plugins kind of do the things a restaurant website needs to do, and the themes bundle all that stuff up and present it in a fashion that hopefully matches the restaurant's character and fits their needs, that sort of thing.
That's awesome. So if you're listening to this episode and you happen to be a restaurant owner and are also making cooking classes, there's not a better podcast episode on the internet to listen to right now than this one. But even if you're not a restaurant owner or a course creator, at the same time, you're still going to get a lot of value out of this episode as we dive into this issue of design versus functionality. So I kind of take a similar approach where I believe that, plugins in the WordPress language are for functionality, and then themes are there for, design, or like you said, the presentation layer. I'm probably going to steal that and use that expression later. But I think of themes as design. And really my experience with all this is in 2012, I launched my first online course project. It's still up. It's called Organic Life Guru. It's a gardening courses website, and I partnered with experts all over the world to make gardening courses. I found a theme on ThemeForest that was a LMS theme called Academy, and the site is still using that right now. Pretty soon I'm going to be switching it over to LifterLMS and all our stuff, but that's where I started. I started with an LMS theme. But what ended up happening is I got kind of locked in. I can't easily change the design because I would lose all the functionality, the LMS functionality that's in it. So when I came around after doing a lot of client work for people building online courses and membership sites and doing those websites with WordPress, I really got crystal clear on, it's nice for functionality to be portable and themes to be for design, so that you can easily change a theme later, or work with just functionality in isolation from each other. So that's been kind of my experience with it. But tell us more about how you approach theme versus plugin, functionality versus design.
Yeah, well, when I sort of got started with Theme of the Crop, which was probably, I think it was more like end of 2013. Around that time, there were a lot of concerns within the WordPress community about what had happened with the sort of sudden growth of themes on ThemeForest, and the way that they would bundle functionality into the theme, like you experienced with your LMS theme. And the problem is that you would buy this theme and it would come with all of this functionality, but then 2-3 years later, when you needed to make a change, you couldn't just take your website you'd built and move it to another theme, because both the functionality and the presentation were all bundled up together. So right when I started coming out with Theme of the Crop was when there was a lot of discussion around this. And ThemeForest has since sort of come out with rules basically telling theme developers you can't bundle functionality with your theme. If you do, you kind of have to split it off into a plugin. And that had the right intention, but unfortunately you've ended up with a situation where every theme has split the two, but it's still using its own proprietary plugin and its own proprietary theme. And so even though the data is technically separated, you still can't really go from one theme to the next because they're using completely different platforms. So essentially within the crop, what I do is I built a suite of plugins that were not just restricted to my themes, but which a number of other themers could make use of, with the intention that somebody who buys one of my themes could move to a competitor and still use all the same sort of functionality. That's kind of the ideal. I think the reality is sometimes a little bit more complicated, but definitely sort of it's the question around lock-in. And if your audience tried to build its audience on a third-party service like Facebook or somewhere, they're going to face the same issue where it's difficult to actually get those customers and those relationships out of that locked-in service-based place and into a place where you control the data and you can do whatever you want with it. If you want to make some special thing, you can go out, you can hire a developer and you can do it. You can't do that on a locked-in system like Facebook. And so it's this kind of descending levels of separation between all these different components, which just allow your business to grow as you grow rather than being locked into one thing forever.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the strengths and weaknesses, I guess, of the WordPress community, because WordPress has it's on a mission to democratize publishing and application development and these things. But part of the democratization process is, just having open borders basically, and being able to, take one piece out and insert another piece in without the whole thing falling apart. So WordPress can be very simple, or you can get very complicated with, lots of plugins and, or a lightweight theme or a heavyweight theme. So it's just one of the issues there. And that's such a great point about lock-in, making things portable. Even at LifterLMS, we recently added a export feature. So you can actually export all your courses and, use that for a backup or take them somewhere else. But that's just part of our alignment with the issue of not locking people in. We also have an import feature where we make it easy for people to pull in courses from somewhere else. So that portability is a big part of things. So, well, what in your mind makes a great theme? And it's sort of a loaded question, because one of the things that I really admired about you and wanted to have you on the show for is how you got really focused on one very specific type of user or customer. Because sometimes the, things like what we call a bloated theme can do 57 different things and all this stuff. But just like with LifterLMS, we're really focused on people who want to sell courses, and that's about it. It either resonates or it doesn't. So what makes a good theme in your opinion, and how did you get so focused on the restaurant owner or the restaurant user type?
Yeah. So the question of what makes a good theme is tricky, because it does depend a lot on the user, and it depends a lot on sort of the whole process around which the website is getting built and how it will be maintained and all that sort of stuff. I think in an ideal world, where everything was completely separated and you had maximum flexibility and portability from one thing to another, a theme would do nothing but define the presentation of the site. So, you know, the colors that are used, the typography, you know, the font stacks, you know, basic layout things like is the text on the left or the right. And, you know, ideally a theme would only ever do that. In reality, themes kind of need to be a little bit aware of the content that they're working with. The sort of any theme for any website, it really only works if you're talking about specific archetypal websites, like any theme for any shop website, any theme for any blog website. You know, it's very hard to take a design that works really well for a blog and make it work really well for a shop, for instance. So in that sense, although themes should be portable from one place to another, in some ways they have to be kind of what I call plugin aware. Like they have to know the plugins that they're meant to be interacting with in order to present them in the best possible light. And that's where standardization and stuff comes in. So a good theme will try to do less on its own. Like it won't try and have its own bespoke system for everything. What it will try to do is find best-in-class plugins for the specific features that its target customer needs, and it will integrate those plugins with the theme. So that could be using LifterLMS. It could be, if I was a food blogger, it could be going out there and finding the best, most reliable like a recipe plugin, for instance, and making sure that my theme presents it really well. So I think a good theme is targeted enough to know which themes which plugins to select and which plugins to not select, but not so specific that it only ever works with some narrow plugin that only the people using that theme are going to be using. What you want to do is find plugins that are widely used. That's sort of my general PSA on what to do with themes. In terms of finding the niche customer, you know, it was a little bit of an accident on my part, to be honest. I entered the space mostly just looking for some passive income, and I did a just kind of quick analysis of which niche I thought didn't have too much competition but might have a lot of buyers, and I settled on the restaurant one, and I made the theme for that. And by the time I'd gone through that process, I mean, when I set out, I thought, well, I'll just go out and I'll find a plugin that works and I'll integrate it. And I went out and, you know, for a lot of smaller niches, there just aren't very many good WordPress plugins. Sometimes there are none. And the restaurant space has opened up a little bit in the last few years, but in 2013, as far as I was concerned, there was no such thing as a good menu plugin, and there was no such thing as a good restaurant reservations plugin.
And there's a lot of restaurants out there.
There are. Yeah. And I think you'll find actually that sort of the local business market is really underserved. It's huge. And yet when you talk to people in the sort of developer community, they're entirely focused on blogging, publishing, or e-commerce. Whereas there's this massive market of local businesses that need good websites and need like plugins that solve problems for them.
And one way
I kind of stumbled into it, but once I did, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say one way to think about that if you're you know, trying to find one of those underserved markets is just think about a really small town and think about, like, you know, if they had only had 20 or 50 businesses, what would those be? And those are those opportunities you're talking about. Restaurants, of course, are in every town. There's usually a lawyer. There's usually a, hairdresser, grocery store. Yeah.
I live in Edinburgh, and in most places in Europe, you have kind of like mixed use zoning. You know, it's shops on the ground floor and apartments and flats above, kind of thing. And so I really just think about it like walking down my street. You know, what are the things that have to be within a 1 mile radius that everybody has within a 1 mile radius because you have to walk to it? And there are loads of business opportunities there because they're almost all being underserved.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, like, from the lifter side, there's there's a lot of people trying to teach. Now, I'm not saying LifterLMS is a good fit for every single school in every single town. A lot of people aren't doing online training, but there's also this misconception that the market is really just the make money online niche of people trying to just make money on the internet by teaching stuff. There's all kinds of applications of teaching that aren't necessarily primarily focused on making money on the internet opportunity. I'm just trying to think in the restaurant industry. If you're a restaurant owner and you could have some internal training that you're not selling to the public, but you're curating like how you want your wait staff to learn their job, and you're taking like the best waiter or waitress in your company, and you have them help participate in making the lessons of like how to train the new person so that when they start, they can take the online course in addition to, working with shadowing somebody more experienced. There's all kinds of different ways you can use online courses besides just, trying to make money. If you were trying to do that in the restaurant niche, lots of people have the interest in starting their own restaurant. You could have the restaurants, you create restaurant startup courses. You could get even more niched, like, what are you going to do? Sushi, Italian, Mongolian grill startup course, or, the vegan restaurant startup course, whatever it is. There's just a lot of opportunity out there.
Yeah, actually there's a lot of restaurants are doing their website and digital marketing themselves. They're not contracting that stuff out. So I think there'd be loads of demand for a course that really showed a restaurant how do you do like local digital marketing.
I think that's a really good point, because I mean, it's you may know digital or social media marketing, but when you really niche down like to the 4 restaurant owners or 4 sushi restaurant owners or whatever, you're really getting targeted. And I can't emphasize that enough, how much easier it is to compete when you're really focused as opposed to not.
And I think there's a misconception in the digital marketing space that kind of what works for one site works for every site. And restaurants are sort of quintessentially local bricks and mortar businesses, and that means that there's a lot of they have a lot of unique technical needs. And one example is I did a comparison a while ago of kind of different lead generation things that restaurants could use to capture people's email addresses on their website.
So what did you find out?
Well, I came down sort of recommending this third-party service called Privy.com. And what really impressed me about them is that they had a kind of end-to-end platform that connected your website with the physical, like, so that someone would come to your site and they get a pop-up, which everybody's familiar with, and there's a million services providing pop-ups. But you could have them put in their email address, and it would send them one of those QR codes. And so then they could bring that QR code in, and Privy had an app that you could have your staff have on their phones to just scan the QR code. And
so is that like a free drink or a discount or something? Okay.
But the great thing about that is that then you have end-to-end analytics. Like, not only do you know a lot about the person who came and visited the site, but you also know which branch did they end up going into, what did they end up purchasing, or like using the discount on. So that kind of linking up, there's loads of space. When you really start to niche down, you realize there's lots of opportunity for doing things better, or more narrowly targeted way.
That's awesome. And if you just had like some kind of general reservation system that wasn't necessarily just for restaurants, you never would have gotten that kind of insight. I mean, once you get really into the wants and needs and pain points of a really specific type of business owner, especially, the problems and the opportunities are much more nuanced. So that's really cool. Well, what do you think of, well, in terms of what makes great design. So if somebody's listening right here, like you're a theme builder, you know, you help provide the presentation layer for restaurants. Just what are some concepts you use when you sit down to a blank canvas and start thinking about design? What are some principles that people should think about if they want to have a good design, but don't necessarily know how to do it? They may know it when they see it, but what are some core key concepts?
Well, I guess first off, I should say I don't really consider myself a top-notch designer. And in fact, for my last theme, I contracted out a lot of the actual sort of initial design mock-up and stuff.
So there's the first lesson. There's the first lesson right there, which is, you know, perhaps leverage another designer, like, or at least at the first level to get the brand guideline or some general like styles.
Yeah, what I would do is I would distinguish between kind of aesthetic design and what's often called user experience or user interface design. So I'm not very good at that aesthetic design, and that is, you know, somebody who can come up with a really cool logo or who could make an awesome looking poster. That requires aesthetic skills, which I think I'm like okay at, but I'm not quite up there. But the other side of it is much more focused on sort of marketing principles and business outcomes.
Like you were just describing with the pop-up and the connecting bricks to clicks.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. The thing I see all the time is this restaurant has this website that has a million different style things on it. There's animations going on. There's loads of stuff going on. But they don't have their phone number or their opening hours or even their address. Like the very first thing that you should be thinking about in business is, what does the user who comes to your website want to do? And how can I make that as clear as possible for them to do it? You don't need to be a good designer to think through that. You don't need that at all. In fact, oftentimes really good designers aren't the best at that because they don't know your business and they don't know your customers. This might be the first restaurant or LMS website they've ever built. They might not know what are the priorities, and you kind of need to be able to set those. And then the other big thing that I think of right off the bat is how are you going to convert? So a customer might want to come, and they might already know they want to come to the restaurant, for instance. And in that case, you just need to make sure that they can get the address, the phone number, or the opening hours as quickly as they want, because that's probably what they're coming for. But the other thing is that customer who's just checking you out, how are you going to convert them from a potential customer into a real one? And you do that by using things like calls to action. So you give them a really compelling prompt that makes them interested in it, and then you give them a really clear action they can take to fulfill whatever you've prompted them to do, whether that's make a booking or look at your menu or look at a map of where you're located, something like that, so they can turn that click into a brick.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but so that's probably the second big thing. The third big thing is a little bit technical, but for instance, particularly with the restaurant space, obviously mobile compatibility is really important for just about anybody on the web, but I think it's especially important for restaurants. A lot of restaurant customers might be tourists who are in town. They might have data roaming issues, so they might be on a 3G connection. So they're going to be on a slow phone connection, and they're probably going to be checking out all of your competitors at once, trying to figure out where they're going to go.
So that's where like a fancy design could hurt you, that has all these animations and things that are hard to load on the phone. And you actually, they might just give up and move on because your website's too slow, even though it's beautiful.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And you've got to be able to turn that visitor around as quickly as possible. And that's a big, massive chunk of users. I'd say it's probably more than 50% for most restaurants. Not necessarily the tourist angle, but the mobile user. And you're right that kind of the more fluff you put into your website, the slower it's going to be. And finally, the last thing is you need good design less than you need good photos. Obviously, they're all kind of part of the same thing. But if you have a choice between spending loads of money on a whiz-bang website that somebody's going to make for you, or you could spend money on hiring a photographer, at least for restaurants. This isn't true for all niches, but for restaurants, I would tell them, pay for that photographer, because you can put great photos on a plain website and it'll look way better than bad photos on a fancy website.
That's awesome. Yeah. And in the course world, we have a similar recommendation in that let's not make the website too fancy. Let's put all the focus on the lesson content, like the videos or the images. If you make everything around it, all these animations and pictures and things, it can get really distracting. Well, I didn't realize I had somebody with that $1 million skill on the line of UX design. So I kind of want to unpack that a little bit, because I think that the user experience design is like a highly underrated and misunderstood. And I don't even know if there's any way to like really, there's training programs for it or whatever. What I see when I run into user experience designers is it sort of evolves over time. And then if they really niche down and really invest in the users, they think about all this stuff from that standpoint of this person passing through an experience, and how does technology support that, instead of starting with, okay, I need all these building blocks of technology because I'm this kind of business. It's very different. And in education, it's all about the end user. Like, if whatever decision needs to be made, as long as you focus on the end student, as long as it's the best call for that person, everybody else wins. And the same way what you're talking about is, let's focus on the end prospective restaurant goer. If speed's important, if finding it's important, if getting to the menu, the hours is important. Those are really important things. I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than going to a restaurant on Sunday and it's closed, and you drove a long way because the hours weren't easy to find on the website. I actually, because I'm a web guy, I look at restaurants a lot just with a critical eye when I come across them, because a lot of them like have terrible websites. But some of them, like, even if it's just I would rather go to a website that is nothing more than a PDF that has the menu on it, the office hours, the address, and the phone number. I'm good to go. I would rather see that than see a beautiful website that's missing one of those things.
And it's amazing how many are missing it. It's amazing. I don't even know where to start on that, because I've seen a lot of improvement over the last 3 years in terms of restaurant websites, but you still run across so many where you just think like nobody's put any thought into the problem solving side of this. Yeah.
I do want to go off on a little tangent here, because you brought it up, which is SEO. When you really niche down, you get the unique challenges of a really specific segment. So for course creators, one of the big SEO challenges is a lot of their content is locked down beside lessons and things and memberships. So the search engines don't necessarily index it. So that's a huge SEO challenge that like a blog site doesn't have at all. So what is this SEO problem or opportunity that you solve with restaurant sites? What is that all about?
Yeah, it's primarily about rich snippets for local businesses. So if you search for a restaurant or any kind of local business on Google, you'll probably know what I'm talking about when I talk about that little panel that appears on the side, and it's got a map, and it's got your name, a business name, and it may or may not have a phone number, opening hours. It can even have a link to your restaurant menu. It can have a link to where you accept reservations. So a lot of what I do is provide a really simple way to put in that data and then output it in a way that Google knows how to read and interpret and display that.
Super valuable. Yeah.
And should be, I think, like one of the primary parts of a restaurant website. But actually getting people to be interested in this is quite difficult because they haven't yet made that switch. Everybody knows you need SEO, but nobody's quite recognized the value of local SEO for local businesses, because it's not like the main when you go to Google on your desktop and you put in that search, you get that side panel. But a whole lot of people are doing searches directly from Google Maps on their phone, for instance. And the way that Google Maps knows how to put that dot that shows where your restaurant is through that same kind of schema markup system. So yeah, I think it's incredibly valuable, and kind of a shame that it's not really thought about by many restaurants, because a lot of restaurants have terrible websites. If they just had this up, it would probably make a pretty big difference for them.
So somebody who's listening to this episode, go make an online course called SEO for Restaurant Owners, and you can use LifterLMS to do that. And
and let me know so I can tell my all my customers to go follow it.
Yeah, and then they can get some themes from Theme of the Crop. So that's a really good insight. Yeah, SEO is just one of those things. Sometimes I think it's important, especially if you're doing something business to business. Some things are really hard for the business to latch onto, or maybe because there's an education gap, like, oh, I don't even understand this SEO thing, or certain things are overvalued, like, oh, I want this animation and the slider, and you're like, no, they want your menu and your office hours, and they want it to load fast.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a component of identity that's wrapped up in somebody's website, and so somebody really wants it to represent themselves, and because they're maybe not a technical person, they can only really evaluate what they see. So they want what they see to impact them and represent them in a way that feels exciting about who they are, or whatever. And that's great for a blog or a personal project, but if you're running a business, you should be thinking about other things, because what appeals to you isn't necessarily what's going to work for converting visitors into customers.
That's awesome. Well, I just want to kind of highlight the various archetypes or types of people that, when it comes to design and development, and this is very, very, very rarely, these qualities are very rarely found in one person. So oftentimes you have to hire somebody, you have to buy a product, you have to consult with somebody or whatever. But so there's really three areas. There's the design, the development, and the business part of it all. So I like what you said about design. There's an aesthetic designer, and then there's the UX designer. And then development is all about functionality. It's like, well, how do I make the SEO work? How do I get a restaurant reservation? How do I buy a course, protect the course, all these things. And then the business owner, has really two jobs. One is innovation, which means making something valuable, making food that tastes good, making courses that create results. And then they have the second job, which is the marketing or the selling of all that. And often, even within a business, somebody's really good at making food in the kitchen, the innovation, but they're not necessarily awesome at sales or linking up pop-ups to QR codes and all this stuff. So, it's just important to realize where you're strong and where you're not strong, and get products and people around you so you have a really well-rounded approach to design and development.
Yeah, and one thing I'd add to that, maybe a third job that business person has, is to make sure that when they're hiring a designer or a developer, that designer or developer understands the business imperatives, not just the aesthetic imperatives or whatever. Because me as a developer, I come with a whole baggage of past problems I've solved. So whenever I come to a new problem, I think about how I solve those other problems. But your problem as a business owner might be very different and might have very different solutions that have to be found. And so, as a business owner, if you're trying to evaluate whether a developer you want to hire is the right hire for you, you should really look for a developer who instinctively knows to ask you about what these business outcomes are. If your developer is only asking you for technical specs,
like what
then,
functionality do you want, or what do you want it to
yeah,
look like? Yeah.
then you're probably going to end up with something that fulfills your technical requirements but doesn't serve your business needs, unless you're very good at interrupting that person and making sure that they're focused on your needs. But in most cases, you want somebody who understands that their technical skill, whether that's an artistic technical skill with the designer or a programming technical skill with the developer, is only one part of the problem, and that they need to reach out to you and figure out the whole picture. That's a really good way of vetting developers really quickly, because a lot of developers won't do that, and you'll be able to weed out a lot of bad ones pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I would say something similar in terms of design. Design should be outcome focused, which loosely in the web world is design should help with what's known as conversions, whether that's an email opt-in, purchasing a product, making a reservation, enrolling in a course, whatever it is. So there might be great design, but if it doesn't further that end result of, getting someone to make a reservation or easily find the restaurant, it may not be the right design for that project. So yeah, I like that. And that's why I called it the $1 million skill, the user UX designer or the user experience designer, because the user experience designer, if they can get in sync with the business owner, because the business owner also really understands and should understand the user experience, of their ideal customer or whatever, and the experience they're trying to create. So once everybody's on the same page, whatever the resulting, website or application or whatever is, it's going to be 10 times better than, just picking software off the shelf, stringing it together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to discount, I mean, we both sell software off the shelf that people can use to string
Yeah.
stuff together. So I don't want to discount that. I mean, I think,
but a lot of user experience went into the design of that stuff. It's
true.
not,
Yeah. I mean, my reservations plugin, for instance, I'm very deliberate about keeping the options minimal and keeping the booking form process as streamlined as possible, which means I'm constantly fending off requests for other stuff. But, when you have hundreds of thousands of customers, you can't fulfill every single little request, or else you're going to have hundreds of thousands of features that everybody has to deal with, even if they don't want them. So yeah, it's like, I would say when you're choosing products, choose products that have been carefully designed. But yeah, well, I guess what I was saying at just a second ago is I don't want to discount the off the shelf stuff. I think what I would caution people to do is if you take something off the shelf and you deploy it, be very careful about how you go about modifying it from that point on, because oftentimes decisions will have been made about things for very good reasons, and you might not understand why those decisions were made. So you might think, oh, well, I don't want this here, I want it over there. And so maybe you'll go in and you'll hack something about, or you'll figure out how to get it from one place to the next. But if the product has been well designed, then it's had its design done in a way that thinks about where everything is positioned and why and stuff. And so unless you really know what you're doing, obviously everybody needs to customize stuff from time to time, but a good product will have really good, sensible defaults that are best left alone unless you really know what you're doing.
Yeah. And that's one of the neat things with the WordPress community. It's both extendable, but also, you can take it forever and go different places with it. But yeah, I like what you're saying. A lot of thought went into the defaults. And it's easy. There's a word that we use in software called bloat. Like, it's easy to make something like really bloated. So the things that are there, especially if the product's been around for a while or has really come through a lot of intentional forethought before it was launched, it's important to recognize that. It's just like building a house, all the components that go into it, you may not be aware of unless you happen to be a house builder, but there's a lot of parts in there, and there's also a lot of parts that aren't there.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Like, you might want to move a shelf from one place to the next, but you might drive that nail in and realize you've just driven it through a wire or something.
right.
There's a lot that goes into it that you might not be aware of, and that's okay. Not everybody needs to be a technical expert, but uh, yeah, you have to be careful about sort of pushing things too far.
All right. Well, if you're a restaurant owner and you're also looking to teach cooking classes, come find these two guys that you see on your screen, or if you're listening in the podcast audio only, this podcast episode is also recorded on YouTube. My name is Chris Badgett. I'm from LifterLMS, and this is Nate Wright from Theme of the Crop. If people want to connect with you, Nate, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can talk to me on Twitter at NateWR. That's NATEWR. Or you can reach out to me at Theme of the Crop on Twitter. I'm also on Facebook, facebook.com/Theme of the Crop. And I'll reply to you anywhere there. But of course, you can check out my stuff and get in touch with me on my website as well at themeofthecrop.com.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Nate. I really enjoyed our conversations around design and development and niching down. A ton of value there for the listener. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.